Let's face it, this is not the worst thing you've caught me doing.
And we're rolling. That was a really painful start. Well, it's good to see you. I haven't seen you in a bit. What's going on?
Yeah, it's been good. Yeah, obviously I have a 2-year-old, so that's it's a paradox because they're very sweet and but like at the drop of a hat they can just become something completely different. And everybody warns you about the terrible twos, but yeah, it's keeping myself and my wife on our toes, but you know, you're obviously a father, you wouldn't swap it for the world, and you probably remember those days, or maybe you've blotted them out, I don't know. But that's probably the one thing I'd say that's keeping us keeping me very busy right now beyond the usual work and house renovations and the rest of it. How about yourself?
Just working, doing this. This is taking up a little bit of my time anyways. But yeah, I agree with you. I mean, for the most part, you know, you wouldn't trade it for the world. It has days, it's like everything. So, of course, I'm saying that as a joke, just in case my kids watch this.
Yeah, or they hear it.
Yeah, yeah. We're here to talk about you. You've got. I was actually going to start this off when you started talking, you've got an English accent. I mean, oh, we're doing accent, are we?
The invasion continues.
Yeah, I was going to pretend because we're doing an accent. I was going to start doing an English accent too, but I forgot all about it. So it's in the wind. Nothing I can do about it now. So, all right. So you obviously born in England. Whereabouts?
Yeah, I was born in London, specifically in Tottenham, so North London. Born way back in the mid-80s, which seems very far away now. And it's like, you know, when you're on like a form and you're doing shopping and you're like scrolling down for your age. And like, you know, before it was like, you just go down, ding, 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 ding. Oh, there it is. And it's like, now it's like, oh, gotta keep going, gotta keep going. It's like that 1984 is that much further away. But no, I grew up in London, England, in Tottenham. And I have one of five. So it was a pretty busy household. And yeah, it was a really fun childhood. I grew up in England, we'd call it a council estate. Here in Canada, you'd probably refer to it as like municipal housing, I guess, or co-op housing. And it was really fun because it was, if you know sort of London architecture or post-war architecture, everything was kind of bundled in these kind of squares and cubes. And so my playground where I played football, soccer, water fights, explored. The estate had so many kind of nooks and crannies. And yeah, I always look back fondly because once I left the house at say 10 a.m. on a Saturday, it was just like this huge kind of maze ziggurat kind of housing estate that I was let loose on. So yeah, it was interesting for sure. It wasn't your stereotypical kind of cul-de-sac or suburban upbringing, if you will.
It sounds actually really similar to mine as well. Actually, so where I grew up, there was like a row of houses, and then down the one side there was another row of houses, and then another row of houses going across, and there was this big grassy section in the center, and that's where we played. There was like a small like kind of parking off to the side, but we had this big spot, and there's pathways that went in front of all the things, and then there's like a next that went through. So we played games where we literally you had to stay on the path, you weren't allowed to go on the grass, so you had to chase everyone down. Yeah. Or like all the neighbors would get together and you'd have games where like I remember racing my old man from one side to the other, and it took years before I could finally catch him and didn't keep up. And then, of course, once I started winning, he didn't want to run anymore. But
the excuses would come out. Yeah. No, as you were saying that, it makes me. I mean, my background, I've worked in schools, and we'll probably get onto this later on. But what I love about like a bunch of children when they want to play is that they are very creative. So kind of what you're describing, we had a space that we referred to as the square. And it was literally just that. It was like a place where all of the front doors met. and it didn't really have any clearly defined purpose. There were some benches, but it was never designed as a play area. But we would utilize that as we'd play impromptu soccer, 1v1, 2v2, and there was like a big wall that I would hang drop off of. And the amount of times I would like hobble home and probably have like semi sprained my ankle or whatever. But as a kid, the adrenaline and just it doesn't phase you, right? It's just yeah. I think that's the thing too. You just kind of walk on and get on with it, or you go to the bike. You're like, all right, I'm just gonna. I can't run around as much, so I'll switch up transport. But no, you're right. Children's kind of propensity to just create play areas out of seemingly useless spaces is pretty cool. I do like that.
The music scene in England must have been way better than it was here. Like we were just getting like the remnants of stuff that happened to you guys 6 months earlier, right? Like, I know like it was clothing and everything else, but music was like, massive in the 80s. So I can't imagine what it was like for you guys.
Yeah, I have two older brothers, and I guess by virtue of that, I always sort of inherited their musical tastes. So I just went to see Oasis. They were doing their world tour, and they touched down in Toronto. And it obviously going to that sort of brought back memories of like, why do I even listen to Oasis? Because they were obviously a huge cultural force. But I can remember my brother coming back and bringing "Don't Look Back in Anger," the CD single. Like I guess it would have also been like a 7-inch vinyl. And just like as soon as I hear that song, it's like I'm back on that summer's day. In our house, it was like a townhouse, and the two older brothers had the bottom bedroom, so that was like the cool bedroom, and that was where the Oasis CDs were. Usually I'd be kicked out because I was like the annoying little brother, but on that question as well, meeting my wife who's Canadian, the thing that surprised me is like the Spice Girls and how big they were here.
Oh, they were massive.
And just how not everything makes that transition, because even Oasis, I think they're doing it bigger now than they probably did at their height. And that makes me also ponder like the power of social media and also just time and nostalgia. But those were the two examples that popped into my head, bizarrely, especially the Spice Girls, because I've seen all of my wife's friends here, and I'm sure you've got friends or your wife has friends, and it's like, wow, they really did crack North America.
Oh, they 100% did. It's funny you said that about the Oasis maybe not necessarily taking off, say in England as maybe they did here, or vice versa, whatever. But I remember talking to a friend of mine about Def Leppard. So back in the 80s, they were doing all right over there, but they were massive over here, like in Canada and the US. And like they were in Liverpool, staying there for a long time because they could walk around and nobody gave a shit who they were, right? So
Right.
and they even said in England they were kind of doing well, but not like over here. So they were just massive. But and then fast forward, say 5-10 years, all of a sudden they became massive everywhere. So it could just be about timing, like everything, right?
But I think you have to give things time to be nostalgic, right? And then like the Oasis gig was really cool because there was a lot of people my age, maybe a little bit older, and you could just see they were reliving something. And actually, ironically, Noel Gallagher, his High Flying Birds, they have a song called "A World That's Been and Gone," and that song kind of made me think about that, because I think we're always kind of looking back. There's something about our nature that we like to reminisce and we like to kind of romanticize what has been. But yeah, just on the flip side of what you were saying, I think what I appreciate moving here is also discovering massive Canadian bands that just didn't make the transition across.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they didn't try to, maybe it's distribution, but I think of bands like obviously The Hip, Blue Rodeo. I can't say I've listened to Rush. I've heard a few of their songs, but I've also experienced like the reverse of that, where I'm like, I'll take these bands back home and be like, hey, you should listen to this. This is really good. Like when I heard Home for Arrest at my first Canadian wedding, I was like, this song should totally be like massive in England. It's about getting drunk in London and being broken and needing to go home for a rest.
Because you drank too much and you're cleaning the top of the bar with the sleeves of your coats. It's one of the lines at the very beginning. So yeah, to me, it was funny because I remember hearing that when I was younger, when it first came out, and I assumed that they were an Irish band, actually. And then find out that they were from the West Coast here in Canada. It was like, what the hell? Like these guys sound like that belongs in an old Irish pub. Is it's what I thought of at the time.
No, I was, to me, it was like listening to like the Pogues or the Dubliners, and I was like, and then also you also assume, are they from like Nova Scotia? Are they, part of that Atlantic musical scene? But no. But yeah, even if you watch that music video, they're in Charing Cross Road in London in the 90s, and the lyrics reference that as well. Like, so that's another song where like us Brits, we don't know that song. And I was like, this totally fits in with our culture. Like this should be. I always play that to my family when they come over and I'm driving them around in the car. I was like, this is a fun wedding song. And if you go to a wedding here and you don't hear it, for me, I'm like, oh, that DJ, he didn't do his job.
Disappointing.
Yeah.
It is a staple. It was even in like buck and does. I don't know what you guys called them back home, but
Like stag doos and hen doos. Yeah. Similar.
it was always played. So, and no matter where you were, sitting at a table, about to leave with your jacket on, you threw the jacket on a chair and you went back and you hit that dance floor, and everyone's up there, not really dancing so much, but everyone's up there swinging back and forth, just singing.
Just making some movement, right? Yeah. Like it's one of those songs that just gets everybody up. On that note, though, were they a one-hit wonder? Were they? Because I don't know. Did they have any other prominent songs?
They did. I'm drawing a blank on. I have a horrible memory. Let's see.
Because I haven't done. Usually with a song like that, I'll do a deeper dive. But I have to confess, I haven't done that with them yet. I've done that with the Hip and Blue Rodeo, but I haven't sort of delved into their back catalogue, as it were. Because I'd want to hear more if there's more songs like that, for sure.
Yeah, I can't find it because the internet's.
You're going to need a bigger space if we're going to recreate a wedding dance floor.
Yeah, so they've got. I know of at least 3 songs, like including "Home for a Rest." Can fly out of here. Yeah, so I know they've got a few songs that, because I've got them on my phone. I'm just drawing a blank because I'm old. Yeah, they've got a ton of good songs, and like you said, like the Hip is something that they didn't know over there, and they've got a ton of, or at least we think that they've got a ton of really good songs. But yes, I mean, you get the music scene. Obviously, for anyone that can't see it, put up an Abbey Road sign just for Adam. So I know that it's Liverpool, not London, but what were the big bands that came out of London?
Out of London, well, it depends what era you wanna sort of go to. I guess the Sex Pistols. You have a lot of there's something about the suburbs of London too. Like Elton John is from Watford, which I guess technically isn't part of London. It would be regarded as Hertfordshire, which is the next county north. But nowadays, it's probably considered what they call Greater London. It's kind of like Toronto, right, where it just kind of gets incorporated. Yeah, there was a big, I want to say around 2005, 2006, there was a big kind of post-punk revival. So there were bands like Block Party, Razorlight, obviously the Strokes are New York based, but they were all kind of part of this emergence of kind of garage band type rock. If you go further back, my parents' kind of vintage, you had like the Kinks. I mean, you could probably pick out bands. I mean, I went through like a Clash phase, and I know not all these band members are necessarily from London, but they generally, record in London or gig London back when gigging in pubs was a thing. And London is kind of like where things start. And, that's where deals are made. And I think a lot of it was culture. The nightclubs were there, the pubs were there, the gigs were there. So that's where bands kind of cut their teeth, so to speak. Very much like I would imagine, Greenwich Village in New York, or, these areas where things just explode because that's where the nightlife is.
All right. Yeah, that makes total sense. So, sorry, you said you're one of 5. Are you in the center?
Yes. Yeah.
All right, so you've got 2 younger siblings.
Yeah, I've got the youngest sibling is my brother, and then my sister is a year younger than me, and then I have 2 older brothers. So my sister, bless her, has 4 brothers, and she's she's in there. which I'm very grateful for because it's, I can't imagine not having a sister. And she just came to Canada um, in August with my dad and his girlfriend. So that was their first trip to Canada. So it was kind of exciting for me. Now I've lived there for 6 years, kind of showing off. I was kind of jealous because I'd love to see Canada through those eyes again, like having never seen it. So I was very excited to kind of show them all of the different. I think for me, one of the themes for me was the lakes, the Great Lakes. So we stayed in Southampton, obviously on Lake Huron. We went down to Port Stanley, did a kind of seaside day, and it was warm. So like, I'll get off on a tangent in a minute, but Erie was way warmer than Huron, and like being the kind of, I'm always like wondering, well, why is that? So I was on ChatGPT and I was like, why is Huron? This was only like 4 days apart. So I was like, it's not like a week. We haven't had a massive change in weather. Why is Huron? I mean, like freezing cold. Like you couldn't get in it. And this was like the end of August, maybe even mid-August. And apparently it's because Huron is much deeper. Yeah. And thus takes, you probably knew this already. Yeah. Spoiler alert. And then, yeah, we also went to obviously Niagara Falls, Niagara on the Lake, and I was constantly sort of pressing them for like, what do you think? What's different? What do you love about it so far? What do you like? And obviously the people was the main thing, just how friendly everybody was. My dad being a bit of a boomer and a, old school guy, very impressed by the lack of litter. He's always been, even as a kid, he hated litter if I accidentally dropped something. And then, I think they were just astounded by the space, just the sheer scale of it here.
I just love the size of the roads. I know that's something that always comes up when I hear someone from Europe and they're here. I'm like, I can't get over how wide your roads are. Like, so who was it? Someone was just talking about it the other day that they went for. Oh, it was my buddy Ronan. He was over in, was it Ireland, I think, and talking to one of the cabbies, and he was saying about how much more difficult it is because you got someone coming towards you and you got it's tight on the right, it's tight on the left. Gabby's instructions were stick to the line. You want to press up against that line as close as you can, and that's how you drive everywhere. And I said once he knew that, it was a little bit easier, but just he was looking forward to driving back home again, where you've got like acres of space on either side of you.
No, I thought the same. I've done both, and there's just more logic to Canadian roads, in my opinion. Like British roads, there's too many markings. You'll just like have two lanes and then out of nowhere it will just become one. And yeah, sorry for the listeners that don't drive. This isn't probably up your alley, but pun intended. Yeah, it's just, the space I always enjoyed. I remember when I first started playing indoor soccer here in London at BMO and just driving in the middle of, let's say it's February, so it's pitch black, but just being really, really freaked out by the scale. And like, I'd never seen the sky like that. Just the stars. Because in London, you just don't see, you might have the odd occasion, but there's so much light pollution, right? So you never get to see the stars like that. And obviously there's buildings everywhere. So that kind of freaked me out a bit. And then the other thing was just seeing all these like barns in the distance. And I was like, maybe I was in a true crime kind of podcast zone back then, which was seeping into my consciousness. But I was like, anyone could be in there doing anything. And I don't like that. I'm going to drive a little bit quicker past that one. So yeah, the scale is astounding. And I think that kind of blew their mind a little bit. And they kept calling the lakes the sea. And I was like, no, that's not the sea. That's a lake.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I understand why people think that because you can't see the other side, or, I mean, there's certain sections you can if you're depending on how close you are to the, say, like the end of Lake Ontario, and you're close enough. You can kind of see, but I mean, it's no different than the English Channel. I mean, you can't see across to that. You can't see the other side from certain sections of it.
You can see France on a clear day.
See, I was in France and I couldn't see England.
That would just be all the fog and the mist. And
yeah, it could have been. I guess I assumed it was like the Great Lakes at the time, and
I think it's rare. I don't think it's. I have a friend that lives very close to Dover, and when I've stayed with him, there has been days when we've walked along, and you can kind of see the outcrop of You can even see like Belgium. So I think there's a part of that coastline that kind of comes out a lot further than, say a Calais, which is probably more recessed. But you get into scale. Think of how many times you could fit the UK and Ontario alone.
Right.
But then you also have like 60 million people living in that space versus what's Canada now, like 40 million.
40, yeah.
But spread out, and actually most of the population just lives in these kind of slivers,
Yeah.
So even that, I feel that like when I go back to London, England, I just feel like suffocated, and I'm like, oh, I miss my car, I miss the space, I miss my house, my lot, whatever. Like it's just space. So they definitely felt that. But yeah, they really enjoyed the people as well. I think everyone was so nice, and so people are nice in England, but like walking through St. Mary's, people are going to say good morning to you. And like, you're not necessarily going to get that in a city. I don't know about a Toronto, maybe it's a city versus town thing more so than a England versus Canada.
Yeah, I feel like like a place like Toronto, if you were to say hi to somebody because we're from a smaller area, they'll say hi back. Don't I don't find that they're the first ones to say hi. So or good morning or whatever, right?
So you could do that in London, and what happened is someone would look at you like you're crazy. They'd be like it's like, why are you talking to me? I don't know you. It's not the done. I now have to like restrain myself from doing that there. I'm like, no, people aren't like that here.
You just need to wear a shirt that says I'm not from here.
Yeah. It's weird actually when you emigrate and you go back to home, original home, how now I feel very different. I don't feel like I'm from there anymore. Like it's weird how that transition happens.
And that was only after 6 years.
6 years, yeah.
Well, let me ask you this. I've had several friends that have been from
Yeah.
England that, again, the same as us, where you don't necessarily do stuff close to you or whatever, but after living here for so long and then going back, they've started doing the touristy stuff that they never did when they were younger.
Yeah, 100%. Especially being from London. I mean, I'm from like not the outskirts, but I'm not from central London or even what they call inner London. But completely right. So one of the things I missed most was riding the top deck of a London bus. We have the red double-decker buses. That was how I got to school. That was how I saw my friends. I only actually ended up driving. I got my driving license 3 months before I moved here, just because I knew I had to drive to live in Canada. Right. So one of the first things was just, so my birthday is Christmas Eve. So one Christmas I went home to see my mum and my brothers and sister and whatnot. And I just remember like getting the bus, going to see, I think it was The Rise of Skywalker, finished the movie. And I just kept getting on buses for like no reason than to just like, just take in London from 2 stories up, but you're moving. It's like a free tour guide. And to your point, I completely agree. And the thing I crave most now is like those old style pubs and the architecture. And I always have to get in like a pub crawl with friends and family, but like the right pubs, like the low roofs, or there's some really good ones on the River Thames. Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. You see London or England through a different lens. And you seek that out. Whereas when you live there, you just kind of take it for granted. I wonder if there's a version of that here with like the lakes or Niagara or Toronto. Or I wonder if people are the same where they're like, that's there, but
I think it is 100%. Like, just perfect example. A bunch of my friends were like, let's go somewhere. Let's go to Boston. Let's go to Philly. Let's go. And then there's other people that are like, let's go to Toronto. It's literally right there. It's got everything. It's got like multicultural everything, right? Any kind of food you want, just walk 20 feet and you're gonna find like another restaurant, right? But it was always one that we always just kind of, we'll do it next time. So I'm talking 30 years ago when I still lived in Ottawa, we would drive to Montreal or we would go to Kingston.
Right, because they're like equidistance, right? One way or the other.
an hour and 30 minutes, and you're right where you want or need to be, right? So, but yeah, you literally take everything for granted. It's just like we have this big, massive, vast country, and I've been to BC, but I flew over top of all the other provinces, and I know nothing about them. And as a kid, I never wanted to go out east. I was like, nah, I don't want to do that. But I know my parents wanted to go out there, and they went. And it was just one of those things where I don't think you need to be older to go out east, but I think you appreciate it more. Whereas out west, it's more of a I don't want to say it's a younger person thing, but they're all in a hiking and snowboarding, all that stuff, right? Which I enjoy doing too. Just now, I want to go see the other side of the country.
Right. There's almost like more of a kinesthetic element, right? It's like there's an activity to be done. Like you said, you're hiking or you're skiing, or that makes a lot of sense. I also had a version. I made my brother drive me to the Cotswolds because I'm a big fan of the Clarkson's Farm TV show. And well, I shouldn't spoil it, I guess, but he owns a pub and it's very successful. And I said I want to go there and I want to visit it. But even to that, I was like, wow, I'd never been to the Cotswolds. I've been to other parts of the UK, like the Lake District, and even my in-laws, my Canadian in-laws. They came over and we did a trip to the Highlands and we went to Devon and Cornwall. And I'd never been to these places. And it's kind of a version of what you're saying, especially when you're in London. You just think the world is London. And I think that's the beauty of like traveling and meeting somebody from somewhere else is you broaden your horizons. You're like, oh, actually, that's just something. But there's all these other cool places and experiences if you just go and find them.
There's so many places I find in Europe that you see them in the movies, like all over the place, right? Like there's so many places in England, obviously, that you see, and you're like probably seen it 10 times, but just in different films. So when I went to Belgium, I had seen what was that the movie with Colin
In
Farrell?
Bruges.
In
Yeah.
Bruges. I went to that exact same spot
It's like
where
the
they
tower,
looked.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was great. I actually went. Only had to be there for a day, but the next day when my wife and oldest, they were able to actually go somewhere. I said, "Oh, this is where we need to go." I just had so much history with with how it was. Like they've got these virtual tours that you can actually take through, and you go into like the old school. You're inside it. You feel like you're in a castle, and they take you back 500 years, and they actually have a live action movie that you get to watch about what's happening, like literally right around you.
So do you have like a headset on? Like, what is the immersion? Okay.
Yeah. So then, after you do the headset part, you would walk from room to room to room, and as you walk from room, the TV would initiate, and you'd be in the next section, and they would talk about this. So it's like you're walking through the same space as the movie. It's actually smartly
Yeah.
done. It was really cool and really educational about how everything was done 500 years ago. Like the fact that they had cranes back then, so they would unload these ships, but they had men in looks literally like a hamster wheel
Yeah.
on either side. And they were called crane children.
Yeah. Oh, interesting.
So one guy would walk and turn the whole apparatus. The other guy would walk and would raise and lower the hook, and that's how they got stuff off the ships. Within like that, they had one on the dock and had other stuff where it was called a water hala, and ships would literally come in, and it was a big, massive warehouse, and they would lift the stuff up and store it for the sales later on that day or that week. So
That's really talking about nostalgia. I've often wondered, like, could they leverage virtual reality? Like, I'd love to go back to London in the 60s or 50s, and even what you're describing, because London had the Docklands, right? Isn't used now, has been kind of regenerated. But I'd love to go back and see the London like my grandparents lived in, because it was much more kind of industrial. I think my only slight issue of a lot of cities nowadays is they've kind of been sanitized and they're very gentrified, and so a lot of that kind of hustle and bustle of industry, whether it be like docks or warehouses or markets, a lot of that's kind of been lost. Like there's some vestige of it, like the buildings are there, But now they're like high-end restaurants or a distillery or whatever it is, and I enjoy that too. But I would love to go back and see, like, what was it like 50 years ago? It's kind of like we were talking about Back to the Future earlier, going back to like that era and seeing how people lived and how the energy and the sounds and I've always been intrigued by that. I was like, if I had a time machine, I'd probably go back to like the 50s or 60s and see London how my grandparents did and how different it would be, in terms of what people were doing for jobs. And yeah, I think they were like more real, if that makes sense. I think it was a lot more kind of
Well, there was no internet, there was no social media, there was none of this stuff. So it was literally, well, even just look at like back at the 80s, right? People went from door to door. I mean, like you went to someone's house, you knocked on the door, and back then it was a race to the door to get to it first. Now, when someone knocks on the door, everyone's their backs like, nobody's home.
well,
Don't answer.
it's true, isn't it? It's like a ringing telephone. Now you're just like, I didn't expect a phone call, therefore I'm gonna ignore it, or I don't recognize that number. It's kind of a paradox. We're so connected, but equally we are completely disconnected. I think that's something I've always felt as well. Like, if I could go back, there's some things living now. I'm very grateful for the stability and obviously healthcare has come a long way, but I do think there's like a loneliness component. I mean, there's books on this as well. There's a good book. I think it's called Lost Connections by Johan Hari. But he talks about this, our modern way of living. We're getting together now, very much more like event based. This is something I've always so tried to kind of understand. And I'm like, is this a cultural difference moving to Canada, or is it a life stage difference? Because now myself and the people I know are having children. So it's harder to kind of have those impromptu visits. It's harder to just sort of pick up the phone and be like, hey, do you fancy a pint, or do you want to go for a walk or whatever? And I was wrestling with that for a bit. I was like, is that like a difference between Canadian and British culture, or is that just where I'm at in my life? And it's probably more life stage. I mean, you've been through that, so I'd be keen to. Did you have a similar experience where like people became unavailable, and so did you?
Yeah, I guess you could kind of say it that way. It is interesting because I think that it kind of runs along the same thing about what we were just saying about the phone, right? I think back in the 80s, people made more of an effort to get out and go and see, whereas now it's just I just don't feel like it. And maybe there's more stress now than there was before, so you appreciate more of the just being home. And yeah, it's definitely aged for sure. I feel like my parents at this age were still making the effort. Fast forward 10 years, not so much. But yeah, I think you should ask like some of your mates back home to see like how that is with them. So maybe that is just a North American thing, or maybe that is worldwide.
Well, that was one of the things. Like, and again, like I'm comparing a time when I didn't have a child, and most of my friends didn't have children, so that's probably a factor. But there was very much more an attitude of like, you finish work, do you want to meet up? The sun's come out because this is London, right? It's nice weather. Do you want to meet up? Do you want to go find a patio? Do you want to go to the park, have a kick around, whatever? Whereas now I feel like everything has to be kind of booked and is event based. So it's, birthdays or, Thanksgiving, whatever.
That's 100% having a kid though versus not having a kid. I'm sure, like just popping into the pub for 1 or 2 pints, which turns into 4 or 5, is you're not going to get a happy wife when you get home. When she's like, "Where have you been?"
Well, even I guess like for me, yeah, even if there's times when like you've got the night off, let's say you've got that agreement like, hey, tonight's cool, you do your thing. Yeah, I don't know. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it if it's like a cultural thing, or whether it's just like, no, you're 40 years old now. It's not like when you're 25 and everyone's just looking for an out and looking for something to do. So I think that's just like probably a maturity thing on my part. But that's what I like living here as well, is because the slower pace makes me at least tap into I read a lot more here. I like to walk. I like to listen to different music, different podcasts. You're on a different plane than when you're in a city where everything's just like go, 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 go. And
You know who you should ask is Maddie.
yeah, it's a good.
He's someone that he doesn't have kids yet, and he lives in Toronto. So if they want to pop out for a quick pint, it's not a big deal.
Right.
And they probably still have friends that are all in kind of the same boat, right? So
I think I'm just trying to recapture my youth and unsuccessfully.
you never want to let it go. It just hurts more now when you get up in the morning.
I saw a great meme. It was like, not sure if I'm injured or that's just the way it is.
Yeah. Well, I remember you were talking about before, but so still in London at this point. You had to take a really shitty job with a club in Northern London. Why don't you talk about that?
No, it was it's hard, right? I mean, so I moved here, I would have been, I don't know, 34, 35. So the interesting thing when you spend all your life in one place, you build your social connections, your professional connections, your skill set. Everything is geared towards that environment. So, like, for example, as you know, I worked for Spurs for 8 years before I moved here, and I lived in Tottenham. And my wife and I, we had a really nice little apartment we rented, and she had some Canadian friends that lived nearby, and it was brilliant. It was just like a fun experience. And she worked in my old primary school that I went to, and I also had worked out before I joined Spurs. But then when you move, it's like you just hit this like massive proverbial reset button, because suddenly you're trying to figure out a whole new landscape. And I knew I was going to land in Perth County. And, I applied for a bunch of jobs because I did some learning and development roles at Spurs, which, to put it more kind of plainly, was just like creating training modules. And I worked in many different aspects of the club, and we can talk about that if you want to. But when I landed here after 3 months, I was like, hell, I'm either going to end up in marketing or agriculture. Sorry, not marketing, manufacturing or agriculture. And I don't know anything about either of those. And I was really scared, because I was like, respectfully, I was like, I don't want to work in a factory. I'm just like this spoiled, like London boy that's never had I've had like menial jobs and stuff, but that kind of scared me. So
After you moved, did you think, what did I do? Or, oh, that's a massive waste of time, and then want to go home? Or were you just 100% in once you?
No, I've never wanted to move home. And even when I've had my worst moments, it's never really been about jobs. It's just been about missing friends and family, which is, par for the course for anyone that moves to a different country, I would imagine. I did a lot of networking via Twitter before I moved here. I don't want to go too much into it because I don't want to besmirch people. But I was grateful because I had some small income with a club. So I was like, cool, I'm going to land here and I can coach. But then the other thing is, like, coaching is, you're on the grass 2 or 3 nights a week. You're probably out on the weekend. So I was coaching OPDL, which for clarity is the Ontario Premier Development League, I believe. But I was not used to driving 2.5 hours for a game. I'd be like, so I'm driving to this place called Mississauga. Oh, where's that? Punch it into my phone. What? 2.5 hours away? And then the game happened. And then you got to drive back. Yeah, 2.5 hours. I'm getting to like Birmingham or somewhere, right? So that was kind of difficult because you'd lose like your whole Saturday. But again, that's my naivety, because for a North American, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that's kind of normal. I'm sure you have kids in programming and sports, but that was a bit of an eye opener as well, because I wasn't used to that scale. And again, being in London, you're so fortunate because everything's London centric. So your team's only going to be 20 minutes away, and it's England, it's London, England. So there's a million teams, so you're not having to drive to here, there, and everywhere.
That makes sense. I mean, I remember when Ali first started travel, we had to go up to Orangeville, which is almost 2 hours, And that was at night, so the game started at 7, and then you're done at 8. You're basically home 10:30. If you're lucky. Yeah.
No, so that was also part of my like eureka. I was like, holy shit, I'm not sure how sustainable this is, you know. So but anyway, I made some movements to kind of move into more regional coaching, so just within like Middlesex or yeah, like essentially coaching in and around Middlesex. So, you know, the furthest I'd go would be like Waterloo, which is way, you know, it's an hour versus 2.5 hours. And I worked for the 3 kind of big clubs in London here. And I took positive experiences from each one of them. And I think the greatest thing really was just getting to know parents and building like a social network. So when my daughter was born, I was still coaching, and I obviously like I was out for that week, and I had this like really cool video of all the boys. They'd beaten their rivals 1-0, and all of the boys were like doing the kind of, you know, the Bebeto Brazilian cradle rocking celebration. At the end of the game, they did this video, and that was really sweet. And it's moments like that you're like, oh, this feels like home, right? Because and everyone was just great, you know. Everyone. Yeah, I worked. Yeah, I don't want to get into specifics and names, but yeah, there's still people to this day that I speak to regularly, and I still, when things settle down, I would probably like to go back and coach, not in this, you know, maybe once or twice a week, maybe in a voluntary capacity, just to still be in and amongst the soccer community in London, because I do miss just going out and having that purpose and like getting on the road to go and do something. But yeah, anyway, it was a big eye opener when I moved here. I was like, yeah, wow. So yeah, I'm out a lot. I'm driving far. I'm getting paid, but you know, very small amount because it's a part-time gig. So yeah, it was interesting. But equally, the game here, there's a lot of passion. The facilities were great. You know, I remember going to is it Queen's University in Kingston?
Yep.
For an OPDL game. So it's like, as much as that's far away, but it's like, but it's a university stadium. Like I never coached. If I took a team in England in the grassroots in London, we're not gonna play in a stadium of that magnitude. I also ended up coaching on the Fanshawe women's varsity program, and I believe I had to miss that game, but they went to Forge FC, the Canadian Premier League team. They played a match on that stadium, you know, like really. They sent the pictures, and I was so jealous. I was like, oh, that would have been cool. So yeah, it's just great. I mean, you meet lots of really cool athletes, different ages, boys, girls, parents. Yeah, like I say, I want to access it again in the future, but just kind of more in a lightweight way. Not lightweight, but yeah, I probably won't commit to a team or as intense, but I still want to be in and around it. So that's something that helped with the transition, because it kept me busy and it kept me with humans. So that might be a segue into Spurs again, but that was something I missed because I worked with so many different people at Spurs, like members of the community. And so like coming to Perth was very different because like the programs I'd worked on didn't exist. But I'll shut up because I'm on a tangent.
Well, that's good. So after the Spurs, you did hook up with another team that was related to the Whitecaps, all right? That's the one that's out of London?
Yeah, we so the last team I coached at was the London Whitecaps. Really great people there, and we're just really accommodating. And like I said, I made a shift more to regional. I still did some bits and pieces with the OPDL, and it was nice because I could sort of signpost players. There was a pathway, and just good people. Just the director was great. The president was great. Excuse me. I actually did a podcast with him, and that was really enlightening. And we did a deep dive into soccer and like the differences between London, England, and London, Ontario, and there's lots of things I observed that I found fascinating. And yeah, I did get invited out to some of the combines they held in Vancouver, but I couldn't make it for, you know, my day job commitments. But I think the one thing I took away is, yeah, it's just the young people who are now, like, a lot of them are young adults, but seeing their progression. Like, I'm seeing kids that I coached like 14 and 15 are now joining their own varsity programs, or they're going to the States, or, you know, seeing that progression. And I still have connection with them and their mums and dads on Instagram. And again, that's something that I'd like to access again in the future. I think when you've coached or taught, or when you've been in those kind of people facing roles, that doesn't leave you. You still feel like you want to help. And not that you're the one with the answers, but you want to support that process, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you just wanna help guide.
Like, I started out in a primary school. My trajectory was very simple. It was primary school. I was like a playtime coordinator. Then I got some qualifications. Then I became the PE coach. Then I went to Spurs. I did my undergrad with Spurs in sport and community development, became full-time. So I've kind of started out literally supervising like little activities in a London primary school playground, the school I went to. And then, you know, fast forward all the way up, and I'm coaching on like the Fanshawe varsity program, or, you know. So every single rung of that ladder has had like its benefits, but at the core of all of them is just the people, whether they're like 6-year-old boys and girls, or, and I wasn't just sports. So at Spurs, I worked on community programs where I taught members of the community to get qualifications. So if you know anything about Tottenham, it's a very impoverished part of London. So the Spurs obviously have like a responsibility, and they have this urge to quote unquote give back. So the 8 years I was there, I worked in the academy, I worked in the foundation, which is like the community part of the club. I worked for the club itself. I was part of like the training programs for the new stadium when they moved, just before I emigrated here. But one of my fondest memories is still delivering those qualifications to like job seekers. You know, these would have a very diverse classrooms, lots of people from, you know, all over the globe, but they all had that hunger to do better and to push themselves. And I think now I'm an immigrant, and I've had to, like, you know, transplant my life somewhere else. It gives me more of an understanding and appreciation for like what they were trying to achieve, and to even be a little part of that was kind of nice. And I think that's what I struggled with. I was like, oh man, do these programs exist here? Is, you know, what can I do to have that same impact? But obviously Canada's a different country, and Perth County is not London, right? So they're very different in terms of demographics and what's going on.
You're saying that like Tottenham kind of took care of its own, like relatively close to the stadium, like where they were. I know, talking to Justin, he was saying that like the pitches that they played on as kids were nothing like they are here, which I thought it would have been the opposite way, that because it's always raining there, there would have been just lush fields. But he said most of the time they were just kind of shitty. They were overused, I guess, and then just half of it was mud and it was hard. Was it like that for you guys growing up too, or did the Tottenham area make sure that everything was?
Yeah, so one program that springs to mind, still going strong, is called Kicks. And that was, when it was at its formation, it was partly funded by the Metropolitan Police. So what would happen is Tottenham community coaches would go into these housing estates, very much like the one I was describing that I grew up on, and they would sort of take over. It could be, you know, like an AstroTurf field. It could be like what we call a Muga, you know, like those kind of rubbery court kind of surfaces where, you know, you could play basketball, we could also play soccer. Because I think the one main difference is there's an urban element to soccer in London, England, that doesn't really exist here, or I haven't seen it. And what I mean by that is that sport or football, soccer, it can be 1v1, it can be 2v2. I should have shared the picture with you, but like the pitch I played on was a concrete playground. I didn't play organized soccer, like 11 aside, until I was like 13. All of my soccer was me against a mate. Can I get past you? And the goals were like the climbing frame edge, the roundabout. So to your question, no, because a lot of us, we didn't play soccer in that conventional way. We played it in this urban kind of landscape. Yeah. I'll have to share the picture with you. And I remember my playground had this mural, and it had like George Best, and it was showing its age even when I was a kid, because it had been painted probably in the mid-70s. But we would just make a game and goals out of what was available. And I didn't play on grass until I was like 10.
Yeah, that sounds very similar to Canadian kids with hockey, right?
Right.
You'd get 3 or 4 guys on each side. You're not fielding the full team, and you would just throw down an extra jacket on the ground,
Right.
and you have a kid there that gets to get pelted with smaller tennis balls, or not frozen because it's in the time, right? So yeah, so I totally get what you're saying, 100%.
Well, and that was when I was speaking on the Whitecaps podcast. That was one of the differences I noted, was like, so here during the lockdown, during COVID, I was delivering Zoom sessions, right, just to keep the kids engaged and keep them active. But I was astounded by like the amount of kids that had fully finished basements, and they would have goals and like a little patch of AstroTurf, and I was like, wow, even the resources that they have. But there's a fantastic book you may have heard of. I think it's called The Sports Gene, and it explores. Maybe I'm conflating that with another book too, but it essentially explores like talent hotbeds. And so, like the author, yeah, it's The Goldmine Effect by Rasmus Ankerson, and he goes to Jamaica. So he looks at like Usain Bolt's facilities and the environment that he trained in. He goes to Korea. He goes to Russia. He goes to all these places that seem to dominate a particular sport and discipline. And without giving too much away, what he found is that social economic factors played a part in some of that success. So like in Kenya, I mean, there's also like arguments for genetics, and of course there's that component. But in Kenya, for example, most of the kids run to school. Whereas here, there's obviously like, the yellow school buses. In the UK and London, where I'm from, kids have free school bus passes. So it's good we have these things, but they do come at some sort of like motivational cost. And even when I was running practices, kids would be turning up in like $80,000 Cadillacs, and parents were like, how can I get my kid to do more? And how can I? And I was like,
Drive a ladder.
I was like, make them take transit, make them take the London bus. When I was a kid, around 13, when I first got to Piccadilly Circus and I used 3 buses, I was terrified, me and my friends. But that sense of achievement and that sense of competency, that really propelled me, because then you feel like, okay, if I can get to Piccadilly Circus and back unscathed and actually enjoyed it kind of opens your horizons. And I think that goes back to like that urban sports. Nobody's giving you the ball, and nobody's telling you the drills, and no one's giving you the match. And I think that's one of the key differences. There was an England lineup recently, and something like 60% of the starting lineup were from South London, and they looked at all of the factors that went into that. And again, there was social economics, there was environment, there was the fact that London, England has something like 12 professional football teams, so there's scouts. So that was one of my observations, was like, paradoxically, affluence can be a barrier. And that's what I found interesting here. You had the pay to play model, but in Europe, it's kind of flipped on its head. The higher level you play, you get paid.
Right.
Here, generally speaking, to play at a higher level, you must pay. And that's probably an oversimplification, but there's always something that's struck me. There's more of a business, and I'm not saying there's not a business in England, but in England it's so pervasive, like the culture. People will coach for free, kids will play for. It's just done. Whereas here, I think there's more of it's more commoditized.
Yeah. What you're saying earlier, though, about like you were saying about picking from South London, that there's a demographic, and like you're saying, kids showing up in $90,000 Cadillacs. It's tried and true in almost every sport that the kids that are hungry, like the most hungry, are the ones that succeed the most. And if you're given everything every step of the way, like, yes, so you're always going to have that kid that is the exception, that is rich, that was handed everything, just purely genetically talented, athletic. Yes, they are still going to succeed, but you're also going to have those kids that were hungry, not necessarily as talented, but they worked twice as hard because it was what they really, really
Yeah.
wanted. And it wasn't their parents just putting them, hey, I need you to go and we're putting you in football, we're putting you in soccer, we're putting you in whatever.
Well, and that's a good point as well. It's the parents saying we are putting you, right? Like, so who's got the control there? Who's pushing that?
Yeah.
Whereas for me, at 10 a.m. on a Saturday, I was out on my ball. Whether none of my friends were out, nobody was saying go out. It was like, no, I want to be out there. But yeah, even the England team, if you look in the 90s and the 80s, the English team was prominently made up of kids from the old industrial north. Michael Owen, Liverpool, Alan Shearer, Newcastle, like these kids, Wayne Rooney, Toxteth, Liverpool, they were all from kind of, not all of them, but they were from these kind of like post-industrial heartlands that suddenly people were like really poor, right? Maggie Thatcher came, shut down mines, previously nationalized industries were shut down, like steel, car manufacturing, like Birmingham was home to like British Leyland. And so, like, I think that kind of shift came to London because London still has, poverty and abundance, right? It's a very, very paradoxical place because you can have a £1 million house with a solicitor living in it with a Porsche outside, and literally 50 yards down the road there'll be like a massive housing estate where people are living on £25,000 a year medium income for the household. And London's full of these like weird paradoxes, like. So my simple observation was that was my kind of observations was, affluence. There's a lot more affluence here than there was in a Tottenham. And it's, and I'm not like saying there's not hunger here. I've seen it. There's some really good players and there's some hunger, but there's a lot more hunger in when you're from Tottenham.
Well, it's funny that you brought up some of the older players from England. Like, I know Southgate made a big deal about getting all the players on the same page, which in the past they hadn't, because there was a hatred from club to club.
Yeah.
Do you think we've kind of lost some of that hunger, though, from the players, where now it's just about, I'm just here for a contract? I feel like the aggression on the pitch isn't the same as it was at one point, whereas now it's stepping out, falling, I'll just take the penalty, whereas they were way more aggressive. Like guys like John Terry, for as unpopular for what he did off the pitch. A guy that was willing to literally stick his face in front of a ball to stop it because it meant everything to him and his club and his country. Whereas I don't feel that they have that same, and right across the board for everyone, you just don't have that same kind of drive.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a few things going on there. Firstly, the game is very globalized, right? So if you looked at the game, I think just reflects society, really. So the game's globalized, but like London, New York, all these places are globalized, right? They're now economic hubs and they're centers, and people from all over the world arrive and live in them. So I think the first thing is the teams are now consisted of like very diverse, globalized players. So I think you lose a little bit of that. If you think of Man United and like the 96 teams of the Neville brothers and Nicky Butt and Paul Scholes and
Class of
92, right? David Beckham was a Londoner, but he came to Man U and supported Man U. And the fact is, I think these kids were from the area and they had not only an innate understanding of that rivalry, but they also really understood like how much it meant to like the working man or woman on the terraces, right? But I think now you don't really see that in the modern game. Like firstly, you don't see as many academy lads make it into the team. And I've worked in a Premier League academy, and the other thing is there's so much, again, like affluence and so much wealth bestowed upon players at such a young age. Like the contracts players are picking up at 16, 17, 18, maybe not 16, but by 18. I saw it, like, and I think what happened is now I think players used to attach themselves to clubs. I think players now attach themselves to agents. And I think what happens then is the player themselves is the brand. And I think the other thing, which is wider, more controversial thing, but these are different. This is a different generation with a different concept of, like, I think of Jadon Sancho, right? You're a Man U fan. He famously had that Instagram comment. I believe it was Rashford, perhaps somebody else, where he's like, "Oh, freedom." Like he was lamenting the fact that somebody wasn't playing and he was happy that they had left on loan and was saying, quote unquote, "You've been granted your freedom." And he strikes me as someone that has that sort of victim mentality. He's like, "I'm not being picked. I'm being scapegoated." Because he used those words as well. I think like Ten Hag called him out a little bit. So I think, to answer your question more succinctly, I think players now, generally speaking, they're their own brands, and part of that brand and part of the enabler is the agent. And I think the agents had less power back then. And I think players had more allegiance to the clubs that fostered them and nurtured them. And then they broke in.
Do you think it's just the agents, or do you think it's the age as well? Like you look at Arsenal, you look at someone like Ian Wright, who he didn't make it until he was a later age, and then when he went in to go and sign his contract, he was famously known for just walking in and going, "Yeah, that sounds good," signing on the dotted line, and he's just happy to play, right? So, do you think part of that is because they've always signed them at a younger age, but they weren't giving them this much money before, and like you said, the agents are pushing that, so it's such a massive deal for them and the club and the family, so that you're going to get your parents involved and all this stuff, and go with this. So it's less about what necessarily the actual player wants versus what the agent's telling the player what he wants. You know what I mean? I just think it's a massive thing. Is people outside see the group that's actually doing the signing, the contract, they always want to oversimplify everything. And he's doing this for money. Like, well, you don't know what he's doing it for, and you don't even know that it's him doing it. Because I feel like 9 times out of the 10, it's the agent just saying, "This is what you deserve. This is what I'm going to get you, and you're going to sign it, and you're going to have a nice, long, lucrative career."
Yeah, I do. I feel like I'm not an expert by any means. I'm not an agent. This is more sort of speculative from what I've read and, my inference. But I think agents, firstly, are way more powerful than they ever were in like the 90s and the heyday of when I first started watching the Premier League. The other thing now is that we live in, you think of the social media realm we live in. It's not just footballers, but everyone now displays almost like these narcissistic qualities. And what I mean by that now is that like everyone is kind of constantly showing and displaying themselves in their quote unquote brand. And I think that sort of shifts the mindset a little bit because, yeah, I think before players were grateful. They felt an allegiance to the club. They felt a gratitude. Now, it's not just players. I do also blame clubs because clubs don't necessarily give players the opportunities. Like, I'm a Spurs fan, and I do think there's a lot of players that we've let go that I think should have made it to the first team. So like Noni Madueke, who's at Arsenal now, was bought by Chelsea from PSV. But he's someone that was like, he should have totally have had that pathway, in my opinion, to the first team. But on the flip side, if you keep changing your manager, changing your director of football, changing your chairman, that blueprint is forever changing, right? So that's the other problem. It's not even just the players. I think the other thing is before you used to have stable owners, stable chair. They were predominantly chairmen back in the 90s. And thus you had, the key word for me is stability. Whereas now everything is very kind of, we live in this age of instant gratification.
That's it right there. Instant
If you lose
gratification.
3 games as a manager, Or if you lose one game 3-0, you go on like Instagram comments, everyone's like losing their mind. It's like, just lost a game.
Yeah, it's a perfect example was right after Fergie left, they brought in David Moyes and they signed him to a 7-year deal. And what was he in there for? Like 7 months, 9 months? And that was with the summer break.
Yeah.
So I mean, he never got a chance to bring in who he wanted. He never got if this was back in the mid 80s, like 84, 85, the year that Fergie came in, and if he was put to the same test, he would have been ousted too. But you need to have that time to develop not only your players, but your manager has to get what he wants across. But again, maybe it was easier back then because the gaffer was in charge, whereas now the players seem to have way too much control over everything. And again, back to the agents.
Well, and I think the scrutiny is greater now because of the success of the brand. Because I think football back then wasn't, let's say pre-Premier League or early Premier League, it wasn't the behemoth it is now. It wasn't anywhere near as popular. So I think when you have a brand that powerful, that brings expectation. But I do think, like going off on a wider tangent, but this is the problem I think when you keep changing government every 4 years. Because actually I can quantify this. So I met Chris van der Hagen. So in 2018, Belgium were ranked number 1 in the world. And I very briefly met Chris van der Hagen at the Ontario Soccer Summit, 2019 or 2020. I think it was 2020. And he gave this excellent presentation. And essentially, they did really poorly at Euro 2000. And they set in place this plan. And they said, we need to improve youth development from the floor upwards. And they stuck to it. They didn't change it. They didn't chop and change. And so 18 years later, they were ranked first in the world, right? Belgium had that moment where they had this really strong team full of really good individual players like, De Bruyne, Lukaku, Hazard, Vertonghen, whoever you want to name. There's an abundance of talent. But the crucial point is they didn't keep ripping up and replacing the playbook. They said, all right, whoever comes and goes, but this is the North Star. And I think this is the other problem, which is a wider societal thing, is that we keep changing. You see this in politics, right? We just rip and replace every 4 years, and you just have this pendulum that keeps swinging literally left and right. And I think a version of that happens in soccer. And I think for me, the owners need to have ambition. You need to have some sort of sporting director that has a vision of how the team should play and what the team is about. And it has to be realistic, right? So if you're Brentford, you're not going to play the same way necessarily or buy the same kind of players as Man United. And then you should ultimately appoint the coach that's going to make that vision come to reality. So, for example, if you're Man United, to me, I love Man U. I remember like flicking my collar up like Cantona in primary school. Man United, to me, should have great wingers. They should have powerful forwards. I mean, I know the game's changed and 4-4-2 isn't in vogue. But when I look at Ruben Amorim and that system and like the 3 at the back and the square pegs and the round holes, is like, that's not a Man United. That's not Manchester United. It just isn't. I look at Brentford. They look more like Man United. Strong wingers, especially under Thomas Frank. Strong wingers, balls into the box, industrious midfield. So my simple answer is you need to have a clear, not just a philosophy, you need to have like an actual, mandate that's clear for everyone to see. We want to play like this. This is our system. And then you recruit according to that. You get players and coaches that believe in that. Not this other version, which is like, we're just going to keep getting, I call it football manager appointments. For me, Amorim was like what a football manager nerd was like, get him because he plays 3 at the back. And, and it's like, no,
You're right. It's because clubs have an identity, and they keep bringing in managers that want it to be their identity, and they completely change everything, how everything's been done for the last, regardless if it's working or not. This is how I want to do it, and unfortunately that's not the way. Like you just said, you've got a basic way of how a club is supposed to be run, an idea philosophy that has been positive and been working. Obviously, if it's not working, you got to change that.
Yeah.
But I find with Man U, that's exactly what's happening. Is that everyone that comes in, they want to make it everything's changed. Let's get rid of everybody, bring in our own people. We'll get rid of all these players. I like this guy, this guy, this guy. But they're not necessarily the right players. They're just bringing them in because they like them. And then they're trying to make their own identity. But no one's been able to do it so far. Like anyone that's been given, obviously, more time than Moyes, they haven't done anything. They might come in and they might look good for 3 or 4 games right after their appointment takes effect. But then they all go downhill fast because whatever they're doing, they're not adapting, so they're getting found out really quickly. You've got a lot of guys like Bruno, who's just gonna destroy everything on the pitch, in the dressing room, whatever you want to call it. He's a good player. Just he's like a Neymar. I don't need all the extra stuff. I just need you to go out there and do your job. Don't try and get fouls. Don't be cheap and dirty. Just do your job. Like the guys did back in the 90s and early 2000s, right? So.
Well, I think when I was like a teenager watching United were very good at going and getting the best players. So what I mean, I saw them take Berbatov from us. I saw them take Michael Carrick. Like they were very good. Van Persie from Arsenal, right? They were like, that guy's a threat. We're gonna make him ours. So for me, my question is simply, why isn't Declan Rice playing for Man United? Why isn't modern players are very different. It's hard to do like comparisons because there is no John Terry, there is no Rio Ferdinand. In my opinion, there's no Wayne Rooney in the modern game because those players, that's kind of what we just touched upon, right? Mentality and whatnot. But my simple fact is United used to have the best players. They would buy the best players that were available.
I think the problem now is that those best players don't want to go to United. And some of that may have been lost with Fergie when he retired. So, yeah, you've got the name still. And it was funny. I said to Justin a couple times, you'll see Ronaldo come back because United was going down, because he'll think that he'll be able to save it. Yeah. And he's like, no, it'll never happen. And sure enough, he did come back. Unfortunately, he didn't have the right manager there.
He was a top goal scorer as well. He scored, I think, 20 goals in the Premier League. Like he scored a hat-trick against Spurs. But kind of to my point, Erik ten Hag plays a high press. This is also a modern thing. Ronaldo is 40 years old. He's from a vintage where, like, the strikers didn't press. He's not going to press. So this is the disconnect between Ronaldo is bought for a commercial reason, right? So there's a disconnect between what the coach wants, what the club is, the playing style, what the commercial arm of the club wants. And this is my point. If you don't have that synergy, and the best example of someone that delivered this is Ralf Rangnick at, I want to say RB Leipzig. He had the blueprint. They had clearly defined principles. So like one of their playing principles is play the ball to the furthest forward player at the earliest opportunity. So if you're coaching that, my interpretation is you're not looking to maintain a ball and pull the opposition towards you. If I look up and I can see that right winger is in space, boom, I hit that ball. So then it allows you to buy players that have those qualities, right? But you see this not just at Man U, you see this across the board. I mean, Spurs have suffered with this. Like, we appointed Jose and Antonio Conte, and I think the idea was that they were going to turn water into wine. But the problem with those elite managers is they want elite players. So that's never going to work at Tottenham because we never will spend the wages, we'll never spend the transfer fees. And this is what I mean. Somebody should have, from the football manager, said, wait a minute, those guys are not going to want to work with Davinson Sanchez or whoever it is. And that's the lack of synergy. So everything has to begin, for me, with a director of football or some sort of technical document that outlines this is, quote unquote, the Manchester United way.
Right, but I guess at a certain point, you can only buy so many elite players that are even available. Yeah. And to your point earlier, you still have to be able to bring in younger guys from your academy, or I guess you can poach from the other academies if that's available, or if you can even do that, because they might not
But
even
that's
want to
what
come.
Ajax do, right? So Ajax throughout, and this is probably more common in most academies, but all the age groups will play the same system, the same formation, the same tactics. So the idea is there's a synergy, and if they make it to that first team, or there's no variance in what's going on. It's not at U15 you're not playing three at the back, but then suddenly, again, I'm massively generalizing, but the simple fact is there is a technical blueprint that states we are Ajax and we play 4-3-3. We play out from the back. We play a mid block, whatever that specifies. And that should live in the academy as well, because then those players should theoretically, when they're called up by the first team manager, they should have lived and breathed that, right?
Yeah,
and we saw this at Spurs as well. Like, I just felt we were producing very average players. Harry Winks, Oliver Skip, good solid players, but not going to get into any of our rivals' teams. Put it that way. And then you have Harry Kane, who's a complete outlier. But that's what I have a soft spot for Man U, like I say, and I would really love them to find, firstly, like a sporting director that really understands what the club should be about, because everything starts with there. They should have never hired Ruben Amorim, in my opinion, because he was never gonna. That system is just not fit for purpose in the Premier League, in my opinion.
Well, looks like we're at about that time, so we'll cut it here. I know we talked earlier about maybe coming back on for movie talk.
Yeah.
Get Justin together and do an Indiana Jones, or maybe we can do all three of them.
I grew up on all those 80s movies, so or we could do our 80s movies. Yeah, we could broaden it, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for coming out. Appreciate it. And we'll talk to everybody next time.